Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
Welcome to the
Bryant
Golden
back here
State
once again,
Media
and
Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team?
Over the
Join
first
us
couple
as we
looks
talk college
into the
football from the
Senior
national
Bowl,
championship
as well as
to college
some
rivalries to bowl
brand
games
new
to the Heisman Trophy to
details
which conference
involving
is the
the head
best.
coaching
We got
carousel.
you covered for
And
the
finally, we're
Big
gonna
Ten,
talk
SEC,
into
Big 12, Pac-12,
some of the
ACC,
things
and
that
everything
everything
between.
goes on in terms of implications of the draft and why recruiting out of high school might not actually be what it seems. And let's get right into it. First off, let's go into this little topic of the same thing we started off with last time. It's the head coaching carousel. Obviously, after every single season, coaches get hired, coaches get fired. There is no secret about any of that when it comes to the NCAA. And this kind of transfers into the NFL as well, with the whole idea of the head coaching carousel. I kind of went over a lot of the openings, the other show last week, and actually, if I'm not mistaken, all of the major jobs in the NFL right now, at least, are all taken. The Lions hired Dan Campbell, the assistant coach to the New Orleans Saints. He also worked as the Titans coach there as well. Nick Sirianni actually has occupied the Philadelphia Eagles role, the offensive coordinator from the Indianapolis Colts and Frank Reich's staff. And finally, Dave Culley has actually been named the head coach for the Houston Texans, an assistant head coach in that system with Lamar Jackson and Jim Harbaugh and all them. Now, when it comes to any type of change, whether if it's head coaching, assistant coaching, whatever it may be, there are going to be some sort of things happening. You're going to get praise, depending on who you are, who your program is, and especially who the coach that you just hired is. If there's belief that there's going to be something good coming out of it, you're going to get a lot of praise for it. One example is that when Urban Meyer retired a couple of years ago, at least from the NCAA game, he passed the torch over to one of his assistants, Ryan Day, the current head coach of Ohio State. And at the moment, it seemed like the only logical decision to make, at least in terms of the point of view of the Buckeyes and for Urban. It was the only thing that made sense to him. And if you think about it, it was actually one of the biggest, maybe defining moments of Urban's career. Because yes, he's going to go head coach at Jacksonville Jaguars now, but his legacy, at least in the NCAA game, is intact, if not more elevated. Because no matter who you are, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, one of the biggest things that is undervalued is being able to replace yourself. And one of the things that either doesn't get talked about enough, or one of those things that gets completely undervalued, is not only being able to replace yourself, but being able to create something out of someone to be not only like you, but to be better than you. Training someone else is one of those skills that is often underappreciated because they just think that it's a predecessor, or what they do is they never come out of the other person's shadow, or they'd rather find someone who already has the experience. However, the way I see that is, at least in terms of the Urban Meyer point of view in that case, having one of his assistants step up and take the role only made sense because so far Ryan Day has been very successful. 2 CFP college football playoff appearances so far, once in the national finals. And if Ryan Day can maybe win the championship one day, it will not only elevate his own legacy, But believe it or not, it will actually indirectly affect Urban's legacy. That's why he cares so much about the coaching trees. That's why when it came to like the NFL, why sometimes we bash on Bill Belichick because a lot of his assistant coaches do not pan out as head coaches in the NFL. Yes, Bill Belichick alone is arguably the greatest head coach in NFL history. But think about some of the assistant coaches he has had leave and go into the NFL. Josh McDaniels did not pan out. Matt Patricia did not pan out. The jury is still out on Joe Judge. And Brian Flores is maybe the first of his head coaches that actually look like it's panning out so far. And then you go to some of the other notable head coaches. You know, you get Romeo Crennel, Eric Mangini, Jim Schwartz, all of which did not necessarily pan out in the long run in terms of head coaching. In terms of coordinators, we have a different story. Does it help when you're part of the Bill Parcells tree? Absolutely. But it's been one of his biggest stains on his career. Yes, Nick Saban has worked with Belichick before, but did he also pan out in the NFL or did he pan out in the NCAA? It's kind of a different league if you think about it. Bill O'Brien did not absolutely pan out in the NFL either. And then you get guys that are highly celebrated as being some of the best head coaches of all time. And I know this kind of has taken a weird turn and kind of a weird segue, but I'm making a point here. Just sticking with guys who are currently in the NFL, and I mean in the league currently, the head coaching tree for Andy Reid, for example, is actually, in my opinion, much more prestigious than Bill Belichick. John Harbaugh was the special teams coordinator, Andy Reid. Ron Rivera has had a lot of success so far. Doug Peterson won a championship. Sean McDermott's very up and coming. Matt Nagy could have some potential there. And then you get some of these other guys who maybe weren't the best at head coaching, but they did have a little bit of success there. Like, they kind of threw Steve Spagnuolo, for example, kind of under the fire with 3 really bad St. Louis Rams teams, but he's actually been quite stellar as an defensive coordinator. Leslie Frazier, the current defensive coordinator of the Buffalo Bills, has actually made it to the playoffs at least under his leadership. Todd Bowles, he's had a double-digit win season here and there. Only one, it was the 10-6 season, but still. And you can't really fault Pat Shurmur because he was thrown into 3 rebuilding teams. But still, though, Andy Reid's head coaching tree is much more prestigious than that of Bill Belichick. But when it comes to Belichick, we focus mostly on his own personal record, which is nothing to be faulted for, by the way. And the point I was trying to make, especially on the point of view of head coaches and more or less replacing themselves, it just showed that Urban didn't just simply develop his players, he even developed his coaches. And of course, as a head coach, your number one goal is to not only take control of your team, to take control of recruitment, and to interact and talk to and learn about your players. And not just your players, but also your coaches. It's a lot different when you are a college head coach because of the fact that you are reaching out to these guys and you essentially do what you can to keep that relationship with the players in order to create the best recruiting class. You want them to like you the most. For whatever reason, maybe they like the coach interaction, maybe they like the school, maybe they like the atmosphere, the culture, whatever it is. That's how you get someone to buy in. You're essentially selling recruits the team. However, when you're at a single program for so long, a lot of programs, if you don't notice, they tend to get stuck. They don't exactly know what to do with themselves. And that's largely because they never learned how to develop that next coach properly. It's always an outside hire, which isn't a bad thing, by the way. I understand the logic of an outside hire. Get a guy who has the experience. There's no problems with that. However, the biggest difference between the outside hire and finding your predecessor in-house is that if you find them in-house and you develop them properly, it not only is going to elevate their legacy, but their legacy is also going to rub off on your legacy. That is why having not only the right coach is so important, but when you have such a lengthy, tenured head coach like that, it's actually really important to think about. So yeah, Jeremy Pruitt might have gotten fired from the University of Tennessee due to his investigation. It doesn't mean that he is out of the game of football completely. It just means that now he is going to be taking a much smaller role, especially in the NFL. He's going to be a defensive assistant in the New York Giants system with Joe Judge. And he's actually being taken over by Josh Heupel. Every single year, essentially in the new decade since 2021, he has been the offensive coordinator or the head coach. He has had a lot of early success, I want to say, in terms of coaching. And it's not like Tennessee didn't have talent. The issue with Tennessee was that they didn't know how to properly use their talent. So, of course, you get the AAC. You get that UCF team that went 12-1 just not that long ago. They're ranked number 11. Won the conference in the AAC, East Division at least. They made their way into the Fiesta Bowl. And he even led the UCF team in 2019 to a 10-3 record, where they ended the year at number 24 when they started out unranked. A head coaching record, not bad so far, 28-8. And if you take the regular season alone, he's 27-6. So that means his playoff record is currently sitting at 1-2. Which honestly, nothing wrong with that, especially with such a small sample size. But we've been seeing this wave, and it's coming across almost every sport, where head coaches, they're getting younger. And why are they getting younger? It's because of one of two things. It's because either they interact with the players better, because the demographic is more similar, or number two is because the younger wave of coaches and just overall a generation of people, there's still so much left to them. They're still so raw. Not only, I guess, do they want to give them that experience, but because they're so young and because there's not much left to them and because they don't have a clear set of goals or haven't really had that same struggle or haven't really had that longevity, they shoot really high. They get super ambitious. So because of this, they work harder. They work longer. They're more willing to grind out the tough stuff. They're more creative. They're more determined. Whatever those things may be, is a large part of the reason why a lot of the recent head coaches have actually been kind of young. Josh Heupel, for example, is only 42. Even one of the other big head coaching hires, which we'll get to in a little bit, he's only 46. If you think about it, some of these top college head coaches, even top NFL coaches, they're younger. Let's take Lincoln Riley, for example. He has not been that long as a head coach for the Oklahoma Sooners, but currently he has a record of 45-8, has made some CFP playoffs, the semifinals, and he's currently only 37. Let's look at another top head coach, Ryan Day. I just spent a long time talking about the legacy of coaching. Also really young. Currently sitting at 23-2 as a head coach. He's 41. Let's take another one of the top head coaches. A very up and down year so far for this head coach. However, in this past year, essentially, he's had a resurgence in his career in Matt Campbell, the head coach for the Iowa State Cyclones. This is his first ever ranked team. Because ever since he took over the Iowa State job in 2016, he's been improving year by year by year. He went from 9th in the conference to 1st in the conference in 5 years. He started when he was 36. So that's what I mean when I say for these younger head coaches, why it's trending in that way, why a lot of the top, or I guess up-and-coming coaches continue to trend that way. It's because of the simple fact that it's all those things I mentioned earlier in one package. And they can bring that energy, that rah-rah type of ordeal, that energy, that vibe into the room with them. And sometimes they can bring that. They might not be the exact same person, but they definitely have what it takes. And they definitely shown it's why they have what it takes, which is why sometimes they get paid or why sometimes they get extended. This is the case for Northwestern head coach Pat Fitzgerald. He has just signed a 10-year extension with Northwestern, guaranteeing him a job as long as he plays well for the next 10 years. And I honestly do not blame Northwestern for doing this. Pat Fitzgerald is not only a good coach, but he had a lot to offer, especially in the last couple of years. Despite having a down year last year at 3-9, the past 3 years has actually had a lot to offer for Fitzgerald. 2017 went 10-3. 2018 he went 9-5 and won the Big Ten West. And this past year went 7-2. Not only won the Big Ten West, he won the Citrus Bowl and got in the top 10. He has been in the top 25 4 times in the past 6 years. This was his first time in the top 10. This really shows the capabilities of what he can do. It shows that he definitely has what it takes. And he can most certainly succeed with this group. You know, a large part of me is not surprised at all, by the way, by the fact that his play style kind of resonates the way that not only has he been coaching up to that point, but even to the way he's played as a player. He was a linebacker at Northwestern playing his alma mater. And he's been a linebackers coach and a defensive coach for multiple years, essentially. If you've ever paid close attention to Northwestern this past year, basically, if you cannot get past the front 7, you're not going to get past the rest of his team. Because, yeah, Peyton Ramsey was a little underwhelming this year. However, his efforts were negated by that of the defense as an entire whole. Because of the fact his linebackers and his secondary were just absolutely so dominant, he knew that he could put pressure on another team's offense, and all his offense had to do was just simply not make mistakes. It could have been the case for them in the Big Ten championship this past year. They didn't win the Big Ten because Ramsey and the offense just didn't show up. However, the defense did a really good job at stopping Justin Fields. they left him to probably his worst game of the year. And honestly, that Big Ten game really shocked me and changed my entire point of view on that team. And not only did it do that, but it made me lose my personal draft stock in Justin Fields. Before going to the year, I thought it was a very clear-cut number 1 and number 2. But ever since this past year, and especially right around the conference title game time, especially with how poor Justin Fields played, my stock in him dropped a little bit. I think it's well-deserved by Pat Fitzgerald. As some people would say, especially now, they'd be like, go make that dough. Grab the bag. Make your money. Pat Fitzgerald is most certainly going to be doing that in Northwestern for the next decade. That's all I had in terms of all the different changes in head coaching, as well as the legacy and the impact head coaches have in their respective leagues. And coming up right after the break, the Senior Bowl. Why it is so important to have the Senior Bowl and why it can have a massive impact on a player's career, but also why it might not be exactly what it seems. That's all coming up right after this.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
And we're back here on the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Ryan Lee back here once again. We just talked about a bunch of the changes in head coaching, and now we're going to be talking about something within the realm of drafting once again, and what it means for a lot of the draft eligible players to get drafted in the first place. And the career and the journey it takes to get there. It kind of got me thinking, not only because I've been seeing a bunch of the news about the Senior Bowl, and it kind of got me thinking about all of the quarterbacks whose draft stocks most likely rose due to the Senior Bowl, but it also got me thinking because earlier this week was the 1-year anniversary of the passing of Kobe Bryant, the legendary NBA player. If I even need to start explaining who Kobe is, you've been living under a rock. I honestly shouldn't even have to explain who Kobe is. But it kind of got me thinking, over the week when the 1-year anniversary of Kobe passing, not only was my first thought, dang, it's been a year. I literally remember I found out right before I turned on the TV to watch the Pro Bowl. And, the Pro Bowl is kind of the culmination or celebration of some of the top players in the NFL. And it got me thinking a little bit about what it means to have some of the top players in essentially one area competing against each other. We have it in every single sport. NBA All-Star Game, NHL All-Star Game, the Pro Bowl. In terms of the NCAA, you get the Senior Bowl. If you want to go towards some of other sports like swimming or track or archery or whatever it may be, you get the Olympics. Kind of a culmination of some of the top players in the entirety of the NCAA in one spot. And the reason why I wanted to talk about the Senior Bowl was not only because we've been seeing a bunch of news about it lately, but also I wanted to see if it had any implication on what type of kickstart can it have on a player's legacy. Or even might not even be in terms of the player's legacy, but does it kickstart a player's career, their path to what they define as greatness? Because it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what sport you're in. Your journey to how you get there is never the exact same as someone else. Everyone came from a different city. They came from a different state. In some cases, a different country. Households were different. Parenting styles were different. If they even had parents, that's different. High schools were different. Grades were different. College choices, the recruiting process, which schools they went to, how they panned out in college. Did they transfer? Did they record themselves as draft eligible after junior or senior year? Did they get drafted? Or are they undrafted? What round? What pick? To what team? How long were you in that team for? They start immediately if just in the backup, etc., etc. Everyone has a different story. No two stories are ever the same. Let's just take, for example, like you get LeBron and MJ. I'm using a basketball reference, and LeBron's dad, to my understanding of the story, was essentially absent. He was raised by a single mom in Ohio. MJ was a child with a great connection to both of his parents. And he went to UNC back when they had to do the whole eligibility process. MJ slowly became the best player in UNC, developed a great connection with his coaches and his fellow teammates at UNC, and then had to square off against some of the best college teams in the entire NCAA, including Georgetown and Patrick Ewing. LeBron just absolutely dominated the floor in high school. I mean, they absolutely wiped his opponents on the floor every time he stepped on. Highlight reel after highlight reel after highlight reel. Making the cover of Sports Illustrated and all these magazines and articles. And he's just a 17-year-old kid. Goes straight to the NBA to Cleveland, number 1. MJ gets there, he's number 3. Goes to the Bulls and the Cavs. LeBron essentially is forced to carry the team immediately. MJ goes through some injuries a little early on. And then the Bulls trade for Pippen. And once they get their head coach, Phil Jackson, in the mix, they just absolutely start cleaning house. LeBron had some success in Cleveland. However, there was no supporting cast around him. They're basically like, LeBron, carry us to the promised land. And he got them to a finals, but it didn't really work out that way. And then he goes to Miami, creates a big 3, etc., etc. You kind of get the rest of the story. You kind of understand where I'm going from here. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. Because at the end of the day, LeBron and MJ are still going to be number 1 and number 2 of the greatest basketball players to have ever walked on planet Earth. You've seen Last Dance, and if you haven't, it's still on Netflix. If there's a documentary made on LeBron in the later future, it's going to be very different. And that's actually why I wanted to make the point I wanted to make before talking about the Pro Bowl. That's why I want to make the point I want to make before talking about the Senior Bowl. Because for the Senior Bowl, no two players are ever alike. But the reason why they're there in the first place is because they want to make their journey to the NFL a lot easier, for whatever it may be. For some guys, it's to show off their skills and to increase their draft stock. For some guys, they want to play in an NFL-like system. Show that they have what it takes. And it's not to say there haven't been any noteworthy players. There have been a lot of them. There have been so many noteworthy players in the NFL who have all gone into the NFL. Let's take the one in 2015, 2016. You had Carson Wentz as one of the quarterbacks. You had Vernon Butler, who has been a Pro Bowler playing at the defensive line. Sterling Shepard was a wide receiver in 15-16. Dak Prescott ended up being the MVP of that game. And when he gets drafted in the NFL, he essentially changes that entire franchise. The Dallas Cowboys are not the Dallas Cowboys without drafting Dak Prescott. Now, of course, as I have said in previous episodes, it's not cut and dry whether or not a Heisman winner is going to be the best player in the league. That's not the same with the Senior Bowl MVP as well. Because, of course, there are players who do end up just simply wanting to raise their draft stock. Like Cooper Kupp, for example. He's a great example of that. He was a late-round draft pick and now has become one of the top tandems of receivers in the entire league. Same with Kareem Hunt. He gets taken late in the draft and then has the rushing title his rookie year of being in the NFL. And then you get a couple guys like Evan Ingram and Tre'Davious White. Both of them having not the most positive draft reviews going into it, but then they get drafted relatively high and both making Pro Bowlers. In the terms of White, he makes an All-Pro. You know, you kind of see this over and over again. Yes, a lot of these guys, if you take a careful look at some of these rosters over the past several years, it's a whole bunch of who's who and who's that. Like, for example, the 2018 Senior Bowl, I have no idea who Kyle Luletta is. But it wasn't simply just about him. There's also a bunch of other guys there, too, who just wanted to show that they had what it takes, that drafting them is a mistake. Like in 2018, you got Baker Mayfield. You got Josh Allen. You get guys like Michael Gallup and Mike Gesicki. All them Pro Bowlers. Even in something as kind of random obscure like a punter like J.K. Scott. Or guys who just need to show they have, you know, what it takes, and it wasn't just simply due to combine like Shaquem Griffin. Darius Leonard turned into an All-Pro. You kind of see this over and over again. The difference between the Senior Bowl and any of these other games is that the Senior Bowls is just the seniors. One thing you can't really forget is that a lot of the draft also consists of juniors. So you get guys like Sam Darnold. When he was draft eligible, he was a junior. Josh Rosen, I believe, was the same thing when he was draft eligible. If I'm not mistaken, Kyler Murray was also a junior. I've been reading up on a lot of the articles and the coverage of the Senior Bowl, especially as of late. And essentially what a lot of people are saying is that Mac Jones has really been turning it up ever since entering the Senior Bowl. The obvious point of view that has been shared amongst a lot of the scouts on Mac Jones is that he's not excellent at anything. He's not like Lamar's ability to use his feet. He doesn't have run ability that Lamar Jackson have. He doesn't have, you know, quite the deep ball that Patrick Mahomes has. He doesn't quite have the power and the arm strength and the size of Josh Allen per se. Or the quickness, the improvisation of Kyler Murray. He doesn't necessarily have any of that. Or just the whole put-it-togetherness of even guys in this draft like Trevor Lawrence. However, the thing that Jones has been able to show he's able to do really well is going through the reads and having accuracy and touch. However, the only knock on him was that this was mostly on the intermediate and the short routes. Mac Jones has been projected to be a mid to late first, and there's no real teams out there, at least in that area of the draft, who are in desperate need of a quarterback. There have been a lot of speculation, a lot of talks that maybe the New England Patriots are going to take him. Or a lot of speculation and talk that said maybe if he's available up there, the Washington football team could take him, have him learn under Alex Smith. Or possibly the idea, if he's available, to have him learn under some of these older guys, whoever it may be. Ian Book is also one of the most notable quarterbacks in the Senior Bowl. He was actually named the top quarterback on I think it's the South team. This isn't just the opportunity for these guys to just, play a game with some of the top other skill level people out there. It's also a chance to show that they have what it takes not only to get drafted, but to get drafted higher than they should have. That's why when it comes to some of these games, especially in the professional level, the deal about it has slowly become less and less, or I guess the impact that it has become less and less, but the impact it has on certain players is actually huge. Especially at the top level, when you make your first Pro Bowl or your first All-Pro list, or if you're in the NBA or the NHL, you make your first All-Star game, it's kind of a big deal. It's the first time that people out there see that you're one of the top people in the league. You're finally getting appreciated for the talent and the hard work and the dedication you've been putting in. It's not necessarily always shown, or in some cases appreciated, but that's why, at least in this case, the Senior Bowl gets so much focus put on it, because at the end of the day, these guys can't really go anywhere else. They literally declared for the draft because they know they can at least make an NFL roster. They can at least make it. Where? Who knows? When? Who knows? Does it matter? Nope. In recent years, it has a little more, yes, but generally speaking, not so much. That's why things like this is so important. Of course, everything in the process is still relatively new, and we just have to wait for more information. And that's why some of these off-season shows, it doesn't matter if it's NCAA football or NFL or NBA, NHL, whatever it may be, off-season shows, they tend to be a little bit slow. And why they tend to be a lot of hypotheticals, it's just simply because there's so much uncertainty before the good stuff happens. And since there's no combine, and since I can't overreact about statistics and numbers, we will just have to simply wait and see. And all we can do is see how this affects the drafting long term. That's been it for today. Thank you very much for tuning in here in the GSMC College Football Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Make sure to leave us 5 stars as well as a comment and a thumbs up in whatever social media platforms you're on. We really appreciate it. And speaking of social media, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and all of your favorite social media websites. And be sure to subscribe to the show, and make sure to share us on all your favorite media platforms. My name is Ryan Lee. This has been the GSMC College Football Podcast as a part of the GSMC Podcast Network. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.